all of that in?
What do I need to? Doors closing?
Good morning, everyone. It's just coming up to 9:30 and this inquiry is resumed. Can I just check that we have everybody present from the main parties that we're expecting and that you can hear me? So just check with the council first of all. Mr. Atkinson, I can't hear you.
How's that, madam?
Thank you very much. Yes. Do we have everybody from your team?
Yes, yes, I think so. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And Mr. Litton, good morning.
Good morning, madam. Yes, we have everyone present for today's session. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've heard from all of the evidence from the witnesses now, and we're now progressing through the programme to the closing statements from each party. Thank you very much. Now, just before we start with those, I'd just like to check where we are with our housekeeping list. First of all, so if I just run through in no particular order what I believe the position to be on each of the matters that were on our list. So in terms of the SIL compliance statement, I've received a version 6 dated the 3rd of October. I received that on the 3rd of October, and I believe that that is the final version that we are working to.
That's correct, madam. That's my understanding too.
That's correct, yep.
Thank you. And I presume, Mr. Litton, you've had sight of that.
We have had that, yes, thank you.
Okay. Secondly, in connection with the Mr. and Mrs. Mead's part of their representation, I've received a response from the appellant that was received yesterday, and I just want to check that that my understanding is correct there, and that has been added into the inquiry documents as we discussed.
Yes, and we've given it the ID number 12, if that accords with your schedule.
Okay. And has the council seen that document?
Yes, yes, we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the conditions schedule, I have an updated schedule which I received on yesterday. Is that everybody's understanding? That's the final version.
We've done it just as a
Yes.
It stays at ID7, but we put revised.
Actually, I received it Monday tea time. Not yesterday. It was Monday tea time that I received that.
And we haven't given. Sorry, madam, we haven't given that a separate ID number. The original condition schedule was ID 7. We've called it ID 7 revised. Do you want to, would you prefer to be given a independent ID number?
If it's shown that if it's revised, so are you intending to supersede it with the well, obviously it will supersede the earlier versions, but are you
Yes.
intending to remove the older documents from the list altogether and replace it, or are you?
That would be the intention, if that's acceptable to you, yes.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it
so
would,
that the only document would be the latest one, which you received on Monday, and it would be labelled ID 7 revised.
yes, I'm happy. Council, are you happy with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, it'll save some confusion, I think, if
Yeah.
potential for confusion anyway. Now, I've also received a list of the ID documents. I received that was received on Monday tea time as well. I'm not sure whether that is now going to have to be updated again or whether that still stands. So
Sorry, madam, I just missed that last bit.
sorry, I've received what I believe to be the final list of ID documents. Is that going to be affected by what we've just discussed about the conditions document?
I think it will be. Madam, can I get back to you on that? I'm not sure I've seen the latest or is it the final ID list.
Yeah,
But obviously
okay.
it's important that you have the most up to date. It may be that once we have done the closing submissions, because they themselves will be given ID numbers,
yes.
we can then complete it.
Yes, okay, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. And finally, the section 106. So I've received an unsigned copy of what I believe to be the final version, and I received that at 10 to 4 yesterday. Is that that's the version that's going to be signed?
That's correct, madam. Yeah. That is the engrossment version. It just hasn't yet been signed.
Right. The one thing that I have noticed with that, and it's been all the way through each of the versions, and it's paragraph. Now, where is it? 6.3. There's a little bit of rogue yellow highlight, which if you're flicking through the document, you'll miss it. But if you read it, you can. It's quite apparent. So you might just want to remove that. Now, with regard to the section 106, obviously we've set the deadline for it to be the signed version to be provided to me by no later than the close of the 14th of October, and we're all clear about that deadline. What I'm proposing to do is to listen to the closing statements today and receive any cost applications, but I'm going to adjourn the inquiry until I've actually received that document, and then I'll close in writing.
That's fine as far as the appellants are concerned.
Yeah, understood, madam.
Yeah, and what that'll do is that'll just take a little bit of pressure off getting the ID document sorted before the end of today's session. That can be checked and submitted later on today. That would be acceptable for that to happen. So are there any other matters of housekeeping that either of the main parties wish to draw my attention to?
No, you've covered everything off, madam. The only thing is that the appellants have sent Pins and to the council about 5 minutes ago now, I suspect, our closing submissions, so that you have those in writing, and I hope that they will make their way to you before I deliver those, which I suspect will be in about half an hour or so.
Okay, I've asked the case officer to keep a specific eye out and to send them as soon as she's received them. They haven't come through to me yet, but we'll keep an eye on that. And can I just ask Mr. Atkinson, have the council provided their closings?
They're obviously in writing, and they will be sent, if they haven't already, immediately sent and to the appellant's team. If I could ask one of my team to do that.
Okay. Do we need to take a short break so that everybody has?
I don't.
Yeah, because Mr. Atkinson, your closing statement will be first. So, Mr.
Yes, I don't have them yet, but I'm sure they're going to wing their way through the ether very shortly.
All right, okay. So are you happy to start, or do you want to wait until they come through?
I suppose it rather depends, madam, whether you'd like to have them, as it were, before we start.
Preferably, I would like to have them, and then I can print. I can print them, and it'll stop me from having to write many notes. And I'll be able to concentrate and listen to them if I've got them in front of me.
Shall we just adjourn for a few minutes, madam, so that you're in that position, and I'll get them as well.
Okay then. So if we give 10 minutes, will that be? Is that going to be? So if we'll adjourn now, and we will resume at 9:50.
Yeah.
Unless they haven't come to me.
They have just been sent. I can use the time to sort out my awful lighting as well. Try.
Or shall we say 10 o'clock? We'll come back at 10 o'clock, and then I'll definitely know that I will have received them, got my printer to work so that I can print them off. So, okay.
All right.
So we'll adjourn till 10 o'clock.
All right.
Thank you. Hello everyone. It's just come up to 10 o'clock and this inquiry is resumed. Just want to check first of all, has everybody got a copy of the Mr. Atkinson's closings?
Yes, I have. Thank you, madam.
Just to confirm, they've both of your closing statements have come through to me and the attachments. So thank you very much. And I have a copy of those printed up. I'm pleased to say my printer decided to conform today. So that's quite unusual. Thank you very much. So Mr. Atkinson, if you'd like to
Thank
give your
you.
closing.
Thank you, madam. As I observed in opening, the issues in this case, are in fact narrow as between the main parties. What determination of the case requires essentially is a weighing of the acknowledged harm to the Greenbelt against the benefit of providing market and affordable housing. Having now heard, examined and analysed all the evidence, it can be seen that the Council's initial determination to refuse permission was the correct one. The effect of the proposal on openness to the Greenbelt and its purposes. The evidence base has figured large in this case. It is necessary to understand the development of the thinking in the various documents to be in a position to make a proper assessment now. I address purposes first, then openness. Purposes. The starting point is the Area 14 analysis, and the references there at the footnote, madam, it's CD 6.8, which identified and emphasized the role Area 14, which largely coincides with the appeal site. And the footnote explains that the Area 14 is divided into two, with 14A being the development on Bell Hill Close. 14B is the remainder of the area, which coincides with the appeal site, but for Langhams. It plays in separating Great Burstead, Noak Hill and Billericay. Purpose B, preventing neighbouring towns merging into one another. In light of this, the Area 14 analysis emphasises the greater potential for development to the north of the area adjacent to existing development. The next study in the sequence, the Site 18 analysis, and the reference there is at the footnote, it's CD 611, is of a larger parcel of land, of which the appeal site forms approximately 1/3 in the northern part. This analysis repeats the emphasis on the role the landscape plays in preventing coalescence between Noak Hill, Little Burstead, Great Burstead and South Green. The Greenbelt Review of 2017, CD 6.9, considers parcel 14B, which I've explained coincides with the appeal site, but for Langhams, which is excluded from the latter. This analysis finds that the parcel contributes to purpose A, checking unrestricted sprawl, and purpose C, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, but only partly contributes to purpose B, preventing neighbouring towns from merging with one another. It is the 2017 review which provides the detailed methodology and terminology for assessment of the Greenbelt purposes, which has been used by Ms. Symes in her Greenbelt assessment. And the reference is there at the footnote. The final piece of earlier analysis is the 2018 Greenbelt topic paper, CD 613, in which the land is identified as H18, land adjacent to Windmill Heights. This analysis moves away from suggesting development of the land would impact on purposes A and B, sprawl and merging, and places more emphasis on the impact on purpose C, encroachment. And I quote, due to the level of containment of this site by the existing urban form and the highway network, development on this site would not logically open up other parts of the Greenbelt's development, either planned or unplanned. Consequently, it is not considered that this proposal would give rise to urban sprawl, nor would it constitute urban sprawl in itself, as it extends no further southwards or westwards than other parts of Billericay. Consequently, it will not result in neighbouring towns merging, particularly as the neighbouring settlements of Noak Bridge and Basildon are some distance away, and other parts of South Green and Great Burstead are closer to these settlements already. The greatest harm, therefore, in relation to this development proposal is in relation to encroachment into the countryside, as this site comprises open fields. Additionally, The topography is such that this site is visible from the south and may feature in long distance views from the Basildon area. It is, however, well screened from view from the A176, limiting local visibility as people travel into and out of Billericay from this direction. And in respect of the role of the remaining greenbelt, the 2018 topic paper states, almost the entire land parcel would be removed from the extent of the greenbelt. However, in terms of the wider greenbelt, the development of this area would not cause harm to the strategic purpose of the greenbelt in separating Billericay from Notebridge and Basildon to the south. Although the 2018 topic paper post-dates the 2017 review, it does not, as Ms. Symes acknowledges, reassess the parcel of GB 14, parcel of Greenbelt 14B against the purposes, but instead, in Ms. Symes' words, considered whether the approach to Greenbelt was appropriate and if exceptional circumstances exist to justify the release of land within the existing extent of the Greenbelt for development and to what extent. Mr. Humphreys takes a similar view when observing in cross-examination that the 2018 topic paper was designed to justify the position, release of Greenbelt, for the local plan. In respect of purpose A, to check unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, Ms. Symes in her proof essentially agreed with the 2018 topic paper about the effect of development of the appeal site as proposed, that it would not give rise to sprawl nor constitute urban sprawl in itself. However, after applying and considering all of the 2017 review Appendix D questions in cross-examination, she accepted first that the main basis for the 2018 paper's conclusions about sprawl, that the site is physically and visually contained, had formed part of the analysis within the 2017 review. This is question 2 in its Appendix D. And second, that ultimately there would be an impact on, there would be an impact on this purpose. She agreed that this would be limited or minor within the wider area, but significant on the site itself. The level of harm to this purpose in Ms. Symes' judgment is not as high as Mr. Humphreys found it significant, but it is considerably higher now, in her estimation, after applying all of the Appendix D questions, than was articulated initially in her proof. In respect of the jut out or rounding off point, Ms. Symes accepted that her argument that development of the appeal site would round off the settlement edge is entirely dependent on development elsewhere of another allocation, H17D, that has also been withdrawn with the new local plan and for which we know there is no planning application. Instead, it was said by Ms. Symes that the southern edge of Billericay is not currently characterized by being rounded off. That may be correct, but the absence of this characteristic is not in any way protected or anywhere noted, but more importantly means that the clear answer to question 6 in Appendix D, would development of the parcel effectively round off the settlement pattern, is no. Although to jut out is an inelegant phrase, it does describe accurately how the appeal site relates to the existing settlement edge. And Mr. Humphreys' estimate that only approximately a quarter of the perimeter of the appeal site adjoins existing built development would appear to be relevant to this and bring the appeal proposals within the definition of urban sprawl at page 26 of the 2017 review. Of course, a judgment is required in coming to an overall conclusion about the impact of the appeal proposals on purpose A. But the point of the questions at Appendix D is to guide and inform that judgment. It is not as simple as observing that, in this case, the answers to questions 1, 3, 6, and 7 are all suggestive of there being harm to this purpose. But what is clear, and as is now accepted by Ms. Symes, there is harm to purpose A. That harm, of course, must be given substantial weight. Similarly, in respect of purpose B, to prevent neighbouring towns from merging into one another, Ms. Symes' starting point is to agree with the 2018 topic paper, which points to there being no merging because Notebridge and Basildon are some distance away, and other parts of South Green and Great Burstead are closer to these settlements already. Again, proper application of Appendix D questions from the 2017 review suggests a more nuanced answer. Again, the central finding of the 2018 topic paper is articulated in the 2017 review through its question 1 of Appendix D as it relates to purpose B. And I've set out the question there at the footnote. If the parcel were to be released for development, is there a risk that the major urban area, large towns and/or service settlements could physically merge? What the 2018 paper does not appear to acknowledge is Mr. Humphrey's point that the 2017 review treats Noak Hill as a large built-up area. And there's the reference at the footnote. Ms. Symes accepted that the 2018 paper does not refer to Noak Hill and that the appeal site is closer to Noak Hill than it is to either Noak Bridge or Basildon. And I just put there a reference to the plan on page 12 of Mr. Humphrey's proof, which is useful, I think, showing where all of these developments are, reminding us. There clearly is a sense of merging incrementally, as Mr. Humphreys puts it, in a way that may cause harm before actual physical contiguity between towns is attained. Ms. Symes agreed with this and with the proposition that there would, be a perception of merging within the appeal site itself if development proceeds, if not from outside of it. She also accepted that the parcel in combination with other Greenbelt parcels does provide a strategic gap between settlements. Again, in conclusion, Ms. Symes does now accept that there would be some harm to this purpose, putting the extent of that harm as not significant. This may broadly equate to Mr. Humphrey's assessment of there being moderate harm to purpose B. There is ultimately agreement between the witnesses about there being harm to purpose C to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, and about the extent of the harm, both finding this to be significant. The appeal site, of course, represents the entirety of parcel 14B, but for Langhams. Once again, the application of the Appendix D questions as they relate to this purpose is helpful in reaching and supporting that conclusion. Overall, examination of the evidence has shown that there is in fact harm to all three purposes, A, B, and C. Openness. The assessment of the impact of the proposals on the openness of the Greenbelt is closely related to the exercise of assessing the extent of encroachment, although they cannot be considered as interchangeably exactly the same thing. The 2018 topic paper finds harm to both purposes and openness. Development would occupy this entire Greenbelt parcel, which is comprised of open fields currently. Consequently, there will be harm to openness for the Greenbelt and the purposes of including land within it in this location. Views into the site from Kennel Lane are more open in nature than views from the west, and consequently the impact on the openness of the Greenbelt from a public perspective is most significant from this boundary. The design and layout of the development will be to ensuring that harm to the Greenbelt, particularly openness to the Greenbelt, and the protection of the countryside will be minimised. It is common ground that the loss of openness is confined to the appeal site itself. Spatially, it is agreed that the impact of the development will greatly erode openness. This is, of course, as the appellants say, inevitable, but being inevitable does not diminish the effect. It goes straight to the heart of the decision to be made. No assessment of the extent of the additional coverage of the site, either in area or volume, is made, but one can see from the illustrative master plan that between 2/3 and 3/4 of the currently open site will be covered with buildings between 10 to 11.5 meters in height, gardens or hard surfaces for cars, roads and parking. The erosion of openness in the spatial sense will therefore be very considerable. The extent of harm to openness must be at the very top of the scale. We're talking about a completely open field, currently with no PDL and no use, for example, equestrian, beyond agriculture. The main urbanizing influence currently is that approximately a quarter of the perimeter of the site is contiguous with existing housing, adjacent to the back gardens of the properties to the north and northeast. The size of the site to be developed may be described as relatively small, particularly when set against what would remain of the greenbelt were permission granted for development of the appeal site. But that is a weak argument that may be used in respect of all development of greenbelt anywhere. Greenbelt is only ever developed a little at a time. At the other end of the scale, the 8 hectares that comprise the appeal site does represent the whole of parcel 14B, but for Langhams. So in that context, there would be virtually no remaining greenbelt within the parcel were the proposal to be approved. The impact of the paraphernalia that inevitably accompanies housing, development, boundary treatment, gardens and their use, sheds, play equipment, tables, chairs, parking of cars, etc., as found by the inspector in the Grimms Hill farmhouse decision, which Mr. Humphreys referred to, must also be taken into account in assessing openness in both senses, spatial and visual. Visually, the sense of openness is eroded from close by the appeal site, from the footpath 32, from the rear gardens of Lang Crescent and Windmill Heights, similarly from Kennel Lane through gaps in the existing vegetation. It is accepted that from Kennel Lane, the loss of openness will be increasingly screened as the vegetation belt grows, but that is not the case from either the rear of the existing housing to the north or from footpath 32. Whilst views from private properties may not themselves be material planning considerations, they are very much relevant to an assessment of the impact of development on the openness of the greenbelt, as here. The extent to which a sense of visual openness being maintained across the middle section of the proposed development, this is VVMG, is limited. This view will, as Mr. Humphreys said, and was accepted by Ms. Symes, be of open land, but framed by a housing estate to either side. Overall, Mr. Humphreys' assessment is that the impact of the proposal on openness is substantial or significant. Ms. Symes agrees with this assessment for the appeal site itself. Other harm affects the proposal on character and appearance. The Area 14 analysis at CD 6.8 identifies a number of qualities to be safeguarded which bear on an assessment of character and appearance. In light of these qualities, the built form to the north, Windmill Heights, is identified as a prominent influence, as is the scope to improve the interface with the countryside. Consequently, this part of the area, adjacent to the existing development to the north, is said to have relatively better potential for residential development. The Site 18 analysis, 611, adds this in respect of what is the appeal site. The northern field to the north of Kennel Lane is open to views from the public footpath wrapping around the rear gardens of properties on Langham Crescent. Parts of the field can be seen from Kennel Lane through fragmented parts of the roadside hedgerow. There are unobstructed views across the fields from houses on Windmill Heights. Views from other properties are filtered by garden vegetation and roadside hedgerows. In the wider landscape, the elevated parts of the site are open to views from the south. This includes open views across the Crouch Valley from Wash Road on the northern fringe of Basildon. To the northeast and in local views from the south, the site is screened by existing areas of residential development in East Billericay, Great Bursted and South Green. To the west, visual containment is provided by intervening elevated landform, the vegetated parts of the A176 transport corridor, Langdon Common and Frith Wood. The Site 18 analysis observes that most of the elevated land is to the north, i.e. within the appeal site, and that the southern parts are more visually contained from publicly accessible viewpoints, with the elevated northern parts, the appeal site, visible in the wider landscape. It concludes, in respect of the northernmost part of Site 18, within the appeal site, and developing the thinking set out in the Area 14 analysis, the land directly adjacent to Windmill Heights and Langham Crescent is also considered less sensitive due to the existing exposed edge to development and the elevated land which currently detracts from the character and quality of views and the local landscape character. It is for this reason that the Site 18 analysis identifies this northernmost parcel of land as being of lower landscape sensitivity, together with a parcel to the southeast outside of the appeal site. In respect of the appeal site, it is said the northeast corner of the site adjacent to Windmill Heights has the potential to be developed due to the existing exposed urban edge which has the capacity to be improved. In contrast, the recommendation for the remainder of the site is that there is no development. The large proportion of the site should be retained as an attractive strip of open agricultural landscape, providing a green break between Tye Common, Oak Hill, Littleburst, and South Green. Parts of the site are widely visible from the surrounding landscape, and there are attractive long-distance views provided by local public rights of way. The site has a largely rural character, and large-scale development would be inappropriate in this location, causing significant adverse landscape and visual effects on the West Billericay Wooded Farmlands LCA. What is proposed is to build on both what the earlier 2017 analysis found to be less sensitive part of the site to the north and the more sensitive part to the south, where no development was previously recommended. Applying the features and characteristics Mr. Humphreys synthesized at his paragraph 4.29 as being of relevance to the appeal site from the list at page 186 of CD 611, it can be seen that within the appeal site, and it being common ground that harm to character appearance is limited to the appeal site and its immediate setting, there is, as Mr. Humphreys found, a significant adverse effect on the character and appearance of the area. Although the impact of the proposals on the character and appearance of the appeal site and immediate environ derives from what would be the development of an open field, that is not to say that the harm that arises should be conflated with that to purpose C and/or openness. They are distinct and discrete categories. There is, in short, harm to three of the Greenbelt purposes: harm to openness and harm to the character and appearance of the area. Other considerations weight to market and affordable housing and other benefits. There is, in fact, a good deal of agreement between the main parties about the weight that should be given to the benefits of what is proposed in this case. It is submitted that this vindicates the council's decision. This isn't a case where the main parties, as they often are miles apart on the weight to be given to the benefits. The council accepts that substantial weight must be given to the provision of market and affordable housing, given the shortfall in supply of both across Basildon. Ms. Mulliner agrees. There is currently no attempt made by her to suggest that there is another category of weight above substantial. Substantial and very substantial amount to the same thing. That is the highest level of weight. There is no grade inflation. There is agreement that moderate weight should be given to economic benefits and to ecological benefits. There is a minor disagreement about the weight to be given to the new public open space. Mr. Humphreys Limited reflects the fact that the space to be given to the open space is otherwise less suitable, possibly not at all suitable for housing, rather than a particularly creditworthy over-provision. Similarly, the new cycle and pedestrian facilities are given less weight by Mr. Humphreys than Ms. Mulliner because of the lack of connectivity provided. The tilted balance does not apply in this case. The tilted balance being, of course, paragraph 11D2 of the framework. This case is to be determined in accordance with paragraph 11D1. This is agreed. Because application of the Greenbelt policy leads to a determination as to whether or not planning permission should be granted, the tilted balance could never apply. This is the effect of the Monk Hill case referred to by Mr. Humphreys. I set out the relevant paragraph there, madam, but you have the whole case now. Harm and other considerations, very special circumstances. Overall, there is definitional harm, which must be given substantial weight. There is harm to three of the purposes of the Greenbelt, which must be given substantial weight. There is harm to the openness of the Greenbelt, which must be given substantial weight, and harm to the character and appearance of the appeal site, which must be given substantial weight. Weighed against those must be the major benefit, which must also be given substantial weight, of the provision of market and affordable housing, set against the context of what the council accept is a severe shortfall. Included within this candid assessment of the extent of the shortfall is the estimated time by which a replacement local plan is likely to be adopted. following the withdrawal of the emerging local plan in March of this year. The other benefits are given even by Ms. Mulliner on her own assessment, only moderate weight, the middle of the 3 grades, according to Ms. Mulliner's system. The actual harm in this case is set out above. Definitional and other harm is not clearly outweighed by the other considerations so as to mount to very special circumstances. In consequence, permission, madam, should not be granted and the appeal must be dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. Mr. Litton,
Madam, thank you.
invite you to make your closing submission.
Yes, of course, madam. Madam, just for your reference, we've given Mr. Atkinson's closing submissions ID 13 number, and our closing submissions will be ID 14.
Thank you.
Madam, these closing submissions should be read together with the appellant's opening statement to avoid unnecessary repetition. They also need to be read alongside the statements of common ground and the oral evidence in which a number of significant matters are agreed. Following the context section, these submissions focus on those matters identified and agreed at the CMC as being the main issues. Context is everything, and we set out below 3 contextual matters of particular importance in the present case. The first of those, madam, is the development plan. The only development plan document to guide development within the district is the Basildon District Local Plan. It was adopted by BBC in 1998 and had a time horizon of 2001. Some, but by no means all, of the policies of the BDLP were saved by the Secretary of State in 2007 to prevent a policy vacuum. There are 2 saved policies that are most relevant to the determination of this appeal, BAS GB1 and BAS BE12. GB1 defines the extent of the Greenbelt within the district by reference to the 1998 proposals plan. As agreed by Mr. Humphreys in cross-examination and reflected in the explanatory text, the Greenbelt boundaries around Billericay were established in 1989 by the Billericay local plan. And as the policy specifically states, the Greenbelt boundaries were drawn with reference to the foreseen long-term expansion of the built-up areas. What is also clear from paragraph 3.13 is that the local plan's time horizon was to 2001, whilst the replacement Essex structure plan would take the period to 2011, and that the Greenbelt boundaries were set with that time period in mind. As the Greenbelt topic paper 2018 explains, the Greenbelt boundaries have not been reviewed in Basildon Borough since the early 1990s, as reflected in the 1998 local plan. The Greenbelt boundaries put in place at that time were based on a consideration of needs up to 2001, with areas of special reserve only identified in order to meet need up to 2011. Needs beyond 2011 did not form part of the consideration of the Greenbelt reviews at that time. Thus, the reference in policy GB1 to the Greenbelt boundaries being drawn up to reflect the foreseen long-term expansion of the built-up areas is to the then development needs up to 2011. They were not intended to define the development limits of the district settlements beyond that date. Mr. Humphreys also agreed in cross-examination that these historically drawn up Greenbelt boundaries act as a significant constraint on the council's ability to deliver its current and substantially greater housing requirements, and is inconsistent with the NPPF's imperative to significantly boost housing supply. Therefore, and quite apart from being deemed to be out of date by footnote 8 of the NPPF, as Mr. Humphreys agreed in cross-examination, GB1 is plainly out of date because the Greenbelt boundaries were set to meet the development needs up to 2011 only and not beyond, are now a significant constraint on the delivery of much needed housing and other development in the district, and are inconsistent with the framework. It should be given little weight, and its redundancy is perhaps a better explanation for Mr. Humphreys not identifying policy GB1 in the council's putative reason for refusal than his excuse of error. So far as BE12 is concerned, the only development plan policy relied on by the council in support of its putative reason for refusal 1, Mr. Humphreys only contends that BE12 Roman 1 is engaged. And in regard to Roman 1, Mr. Humphrey argues that the proposed development will harm the character and appearance of the appeal site only, contrary to 1. However, as the supporting text at paragraph 11.1 explains, the policy is directed at ensuring that new development does not cause harm to the residential and visually amenities of adjoining residents. Moreover, 1 is specifically concerned with ensuring that proposed development does not cause material harm to the character and appearance of the surrounding area, including the street scene. In other words, the area surrounding a proposed development site. Humphreys did not argue that any street scene will be materially harmed, and it is submitted that he has completely misunderstood policy BE12 in arguing there is a conflict with 1 because the character and appearance of the appeal site will be harmed. His position at the inquiry is also inconsistent with paragraphs 5.4.1 to, that must be 5.4.5 of the report to committee, which he confirmed he wrote, where the proposed development is assessed against policy BE12, and which concludes at 5.4.5 that it is not considered that the proposed development would be detrimental to the amenities of neighbouring occupiers and would be capable of satisfying policy in this respect. Moreover, that conclusion was reached notwithstanding Mr. Humphrey's assessment at paragraph 5.4.2 that any development of the site will invariably reduce the views and rural outlook enjoyed by residents of the existing adjoining streets. Further, as Mrs. Mulliner said in her oral evidence, policy BE12's strict approach is inconsistent with the framework's more nuanced approach to a cost-benefit assessment, balancing harm against benefits, as well as priorities regarding the use of appropriate densities and the most efficient use of land. Thus, the 2 development plan policies relied on by the council are deemed to be out of date pursuant to footnote 8 of the framework. They are also out of date because the local plan is over 20 years past its development horizon, where the Greenbelt boundaries were defined for a wholly different development scenario. GB1 is a constraint on current development requirements, and both GB1 and BE12 are inconsistent with the framework and its approach. The council has misunderstood policy BE12, which is only concerned to protect the surrounding area from material harm to residential amenity. Little or no weight should be given to the local plan or policies GB1 or BE12. So the second contextual matter is the Immersion local plan. The subheading is a misnomer because there is no emerging local plan. The council having decided to withdraw the only emerging local plan in March 2022, contrary to the government's advice. In issuing his direction in September 2007, saving some of the policies of the 1998 local plan, the Secretary of State would have advised the council that the exercise of extending saved policies was not an opportunity to delay development plan document preparation, and that it should make good progress with local development frameworks according to the timetables in their local development schemes, and that the council's policies have been extended in the expectation that they will be replaced promptly. And I make reference to the examples of such saving letters at Mrs. Mulliner's Appendix 3. In Basildon District, that simply has not happened. It took a further 7 years until 2014 before the council began to prepare its emerging local plan, which it then withdrew 8 years later in March 2022. The much lauded local development scheme is the 13th or 14th iteration of the council's local development scheme and is yet to be approved by the council. As recent events have demonstrated, approving a new local development scheme is not a step in producing a new plan, although it makes clear that there will be no new local plan until the fourth quarter of 2027 at the earliest. By then, the local plan will be 30 years old. As the Minister said in his 2nd of March 2022 letter, the Basildon local plan was adopted in 1998 with subsequent alterations in 1999, and accordingly, Basildon have not had a plan under the 2004 Planning Act. I ask rhetorically, how is it possible in a plan-led system that the council has been operating for decades now without a plan made under the 2004 Planning Act or any up-to-date development plan? The third contextual matter is housing, affordable housing need and delivery. A consequence of not having an up-to-date development plan is the council's increasing inability to meet its development needs. This is particularly acute when it comes to housing. It has not delivered the annual market housing required since 2006-2017. In the 3 years to January 2021, the council has only delivered 44, 45 and 41% of its requirement. The council's 2021 performance is the 7th worst out of 328 local authorities nationally, and that is agreed in paragraph 6.10 of the Planning Statement of Common Ground. The council's 5-year housing land supply is agreed to be a severe shortfall. The top of the range agreed in the addendum on 5-year housing land supply was 2.3 years. But in the light of the subsequent Eastgate Town Centre decision letter and the concessions made by the council in the virtual housing roundtable discussion that you held, that the Healer sites and the Southern Hay site were not deliverable, the position is that the total deliverable sites is at most 2,360, which against a 5-year housing land supply requirement of 6,246, that means that the council now only has 1.89 years on its own case. The council's affordable housing delivery is worse still. The need is 6,274 affordable homes between 2017 and 2034. In other words, 370 affordable dwellings per annum. The combined gross affordable dwelling delivery in the 3 years to March 2021 was 88 units. The affordable housing technical note, which has not been challenged, identifies that the average delivery of affordable housing against the annual need in the 5 years to March 2021 has been 6.3% and a total of 118 units. Once right to buy losses are taken into account, the 5-year position falls to 45 affordable housing completions out of a requirement of 1,955, 2% of the affordable housing need. Going forward, only 47 out of a requirement for 1,995 affordable dwellings are considered to be deliverable, leaving a shortfall of 1,948 from 2022 to 2027. It is hard to imagine any other authority being in a worse position than the council, with the consequence that many thousands of people will not have the opportunity of having their own home. Further, the required affordable housing will not be delivered through the redevelopment of town centre sites, as the Eastgate Town Centre decision letter demonstrates in requiring only 5% affordable housing, with the possibility of that being increased to 10%. There are real viability issues in developing such sites, which restrain or constrain the number of affordable dwellings they can deliver. Moreover, as Mrs. Mullen has said in evidence, the one to two bedroom affordable units in schemes such as the Eastgate Town Centre site are not suited to families. If the council is to have any chance of meeting even some of its housing needs, including family housing, and delivering a meaningful element of affordable provision, land will have to be released from the Greenbelt, as the topic paper 2018 makes clear and as agreed by Mr. Humphreys in cross-examination. Despite the council's aspiration to increase capacity within the urban areas and non-Greenbelt strategic sites, there remains a substantial unmet need that can only be met by the release of Greenbelt, or in the absence of an up-to-date development plan, development of Greenbelt sites. With those contextual matters, Madam, we now turn to the main issues. First main issue, the effect of the proposal on the openness of the Greenbelt and the purpose of including any land within it. The opponent accepts that the proposals will have an effect on the openness of the Greenbelt and therefore only one of the purposes. But it is clear, having heard the evidence, that the council's assessment of these impacts is overstated. In relation to purposes, there is an overarching concern here in relation to the way in which Mr. Humphreys has selectively relied on material from the emerging local plan evidence base. In his proof of evidence, Mr. Humphreys says that he has given the emerging local plan evidence base limited weight, a position he reiterated in oral evidence, while at the same time also relying on parts of the same evidence base to support his position. This inconsistency was never adequately explained by Mr. Humphreys, despite being asked in both examination in chief and cross-examination to do so. The adopted local plan and its saved policies remain the development plan. However, the Secretary of State's direction made clear that new evidence should be afforded considerable weight in decisions concerned with saved policies. The search for Greenbelt sites suitable for development has been an iterative process since 2014, with successive Greenbelt reviews culminating with the topic paper 2018. There is no evidence before the inquiry that there are other more suitable sites for housing, either in the Greenbelt or elsewhere. There is also no logic to Mr. Humphreys' position that the emerging local plan evidence is a material consideration, albeit one which he attaches little weight to, but the proposed allocation of the appeal site as H18 for the development of 200 dwellings should be ignored because the emerging local plan has been withdrawn. As Mrs. Mulliner said, the allocation of the appeal site was the culmination of the emerging local plan evidence-based process. Despite the emerging local plan being withdrawn, it remains a fact that the council allocated the appeal site for housing development after an exhaustive and iterative site selection process, because the appeal site was considered by the council to be a sustainable site for housing development, adjacent to a sustainable settlement, which caused limited harm to the wider Greenbelt. Even if greater urban capacity is found, that capacity would need to increase by at least 2,000 homes in order to meet the need. Greenbelt release is inevitable and considered by the council to be a critical step. It is submitted that the emerging local plan evidence base, together with the proposed H18 allocation of the appeal site for housing development, should be given substantial weight in the determination of this appeal. Further, as a general point, Mr. Humphreys' evidence at paragraph 4.5 that the Greenbelt Review 2017 identified the appeal site as making a strong contribution to purposes A and B is wrong. Greenbelt Review makes no such distinction as he accepted in cross-examination. So in relation to purpose A, to check the unrestricted sprawl of a large built-up area, the council's own assessment was that the proposal would not give rise to urban sprawl, and nor would it constitute urban sprawl itself. See the topic paper. Ms. Symes agreed with this. In his evidence in chief, Mr. Humphreys relied on the definition of sprawl, paragraph 5.56 of the Greenbelt Review. And it was put to Ms. Symes in cross-examination that the reference to a line of development stretching back into the settlement boundary of an existing settlement referred to ribbon development. Ms. Symes agreed that it might be referring to ribbon development, but rightly made the point that the proposed development could not be described as such. Moreover, Mr. Humphreys accepted in cross-examination that Billericay is not a regular shaped settlement and already has parts jutting out of it, which were not an uncommon characteristic of the settlement, for example, Second Avenue. He also accepted, and it is agreed in the landscape statement of common ground at paragraph 2.4, that the appeal site itself extends no further southwards or westwards than other parts of Billericay. Mr. Humphreys was simply wrong to imply in his evidence in chief that the absence of a planning application in respect of the H17D allocation meant that there was no rounding off. These separate allocations were assessed and allocated on their own merits. As Mr. Humphreys accepted in cross-examination, at no point has, as the council argued, that the appeal site was dependent on H17D coming forward, and there is no evidence to support his position. Although Mr. Humphreys said in his oral evidence, but not before, that he disagreed with the council's assessment in the Greenbelt topic paper, that development of the appeal site would not give rise to urban sprawl, his reasons for doing so was incoherent and lacked any sound basis. The GB topic paper was entirely based on the evidence up to that date and was relied on by the council to underpin its case for releasing sites from the Greenbelt after a process stretching back to 2014 with reasoned conclusions for the release and allocations. It is not something that Mr. Humphreys can simply disagree with because it doesn't suit the council's case and is in distinct contrast to the Greenbelt assessment undertaken by the council and independently by Ms. Symes. The appellant submits the development of the appeal site would not harm her per se. I should just add, Madam, that you will recall that in cross-examination, I asked Mr. Humphreys whether he disagreed with anything other than the Greenbelt's conclusion that purposes A and B would not be harmed. And he said no. And I drew him specifically to the last two columns on pages 55 and 56, which set out the mitigation and residual harm, and that he did not disagree with those columns. Turning back now to the written script of paragraph 37, as regards purpose B, preventing neighbouring towns from merging, the position of the two parties are not far apart. Mr. Humphreys assessed it as a moderate impact. Ms. Symes said that there was some impact, but it was not significant. This is supported by the 2018 topic paper. Indeed, issues of coalescence have never been a particular issue for this site and were not considered to be a particular issue when the appeal site was assessed by the council as being suitable for development. Mr. Humphreys' argument, as put to Ms. Symes in cross-examination, was essentially one of mission creep. In other words, that allowing this scheme could lead to a risk of Billericay merging with another settlement in the future. Implicit in that is an acceptance that developing the appeal site will not in itself cause coalescence. But the proposed development must be assessed on its own merits, and developing the appeal site will plainly not cause Billericay to coalesce or merge with any other settlement, albeit that developing of this site, as Ms. Mulliner said in her evidence in chief, may increase the importance of protecting land between the appeal site and those other settlements. In relation to purpose C, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, again, the parties agreed that there is harm to this purpose. However, after much hesitation and after being asked whether he disagreed with the landscape statement of common ground, Mr. Humphreys agreed that the harm is limited to the appeal site and its immediate setting, which he accepted was limited to parts of Kennel Lane. Openness. The position on openness correlates closely with the position in respect to purpose C. Perceived change to openness is primarily within the appeal site itself and from limited parts of Kennel Lane and its immediate environment. Delete those words, immediate environs only, so it should continue. As the appeal scheme is visually enclosed by existing and in the fullness of time, the proposed boundary vegetation. As was pointed out in oral evidence, a degree of openness is also retained on the appeal site, with the proposed open space affording new views out of the appeal site to the distant hills to the south. Mr. Humphrey's attempts to reject the criticisms that Miss Symes made at her rebuttal were unconvincing. Indeed, he conceded the appeal scheme would not be highly visible from long distance views. His criticism once again appears to relate only to Kennel Lane and his concern that the appeal site would be seen from Kennel Lane during construction and prior to the proposed 20 to 30 metre tree belts becoming mature. H18 was an allocation that was supported by the council's up-to-date evidence. Indeed, in January 2021, council referred to the appeal site as a site that had been identified as causing the least harm to the greenbelt and being one of the most sustainable development options. In contrast, a number of sites were not brought forward, despite the fact that the council would not meet its housing need because their allocation was considered to be too harmful. That the appeal site was brought forward in these circumstances demonstrates that the council was satisfied as to its suitability and the limited harm that it would be caused to its openness and to its greenbelt purposes. Indeed, Mr. Humphreys accepted that in cross-examination that if the emerging local plan had been adopted as the council had proposed, the planning permission would have been granted for the appeal scheme. Issue 2, whether there is any other harm that would result from the appeal proposal, including the effect on character and appearance of the area. Main parties agree that there is no other harm resulting from the appeal proposals, apart from the inevitable harm to the character and appearance of the appeal site, as a consequence of developing a greenfield site. Although it is notable that no third party took the opportunity of asking any of the appellant's witnesses any questions, they have raised other issues which are addressed in the appellant's written evidence, including Mr. Howard's highways and transport evidence, and the technical notes on archaeology, ecology, and flooding appended to Mrs. Mulliner's proof of evidence. Character and appearance. Every development for housing on an undeveloped greenfield site will necessarily change the character and appearance of that site. However, the undisputed evidence is that the appellant's mitigation strategy will limit the harm to the appeal site itself and its immediate setting. Consequently, the impact on character and appearance adds nothing to the assessment of harm to purpose C and openness. And as Mrs. Mulliner said, there is a risk of double counting harm in this way. As set out above, policy BE12 is not concerned with the impact on the appeal site itself, but whether proposed development will cause material harm to residents in the surrounding area. Council has not advanced a case to that effect, and for the reasons already explained, the policy should be given little weight. Once the policy is properly understood, Mr. Humphrey's answers as to what impact the proposed development would have on the surrounding area were unconvincing. Ultimately, he conceded that there would be no long-term impact on the surrounding area other than limited parts of Kennel Lane, and only then during construction and up to 15 years. This is amply demonstrated by the unchallenged evidence that Mrs. Symes produces in her BVMs attached as Appendix C to her proof of evidence. Traffic, neither Essex County Council nor the council consider there to be any highway or transport reason to prevent the development coming forward. To the extent that there are any lingering concerns raised by third parties, these have been adequately dealt with in the evidence of Mr. Howard, whose overall conclusion is that the appeal scheme is acceptable in transport terms. Flood risk, although Councillor Moore and his representations on day one raised non-specific concerns with the adequacy of the flood risk assessment and surface water strategy, the exception questioning that he had made no written representations in respect to the application or appeal. While he said he had supported a representation made by another ward councillor, Councillor Baggett, that representation makes no makes no mention of flood risk at all. Further, while he was critical of the officer's report and Essex County Council, he had not taken those matters up with either the planning officer or the County Council. In any event, these matters have been adequately addressed in the technical note on flood risk. Indeed, the drainage scheme will reduce the risk of flooding off-site. Ecology are concerned that the effects on Mill Meadows SSSI would be predominantly mitigated by the proposed open space, was explained by Ms Tamlin as reflective of the fact that she could not rule out that some residents from the proposed development might choose to use Mill Meadows. However, as she explained, the additional impact would not be significant. She also confirmed, as she had explained in the ecology assessment, that no European sites would be adversely affected because of their distance from the appeal site, and therefore an appropriate assessment under the habitat regulations was not required. Other matters raised by third parties, Councillor Moore and other residents also raised issues relating to the impact on Billericay in terms of health services, schools, etc. These are clearly all matters which are capable of and have been addressed in the agreed Section 106 agreement. Issue 3, whether there are any other considerations and the weight to be afforded to them with particular regard to the need for the development in the context of the government's prerogative to boost housing land supply. The proper approach to the MPPF in paragraph 11. Well, while this ought to be a straightforward matter, it appears there is confusion in the council as to the proper approach to be taken to paragraph 11 of the framework. And it became clear during oral evidence that Mr. Humphrey's understanding of paragraph 11 was wrong. I should add that I'm afraid Mr. Atkinson's understanding of paragraph 11 is also wrong as a matter of law, and I'll come to that in a second. The appellant submits that the position is straightforward. Paragraph 11D is engaged where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies most important for determining the appeal are out of date. The two development plan policies identified as most relevant to the determination of this appeal are GB1 and BE12. Because the council does not have a 5-year housing land supply, and or because the council has not satisfied the housing delivery test, footnote 8 of the framework means that those two policies are deemed to be out of date by the framework. Mr. Humphreys went to great lengths to attempt to qualify this by suggesting that the policies were nonetheless MPPF compliant, but ultimately that is not the point for the purpose of determining whether paragraph 11D is engaged. The consequence of this is that paragraph 11D introduces a presumption that planning permission should be granted, i.e. the tilted balance, unless either 11D1 or 11D2 applies. The present case is only concerned with 11D1, the effect of which is to disapply the tilted balance if the harm to the greenbelt, as an area of particular importance, provides a clear reason for refusing the development. The fact that footnote 7 applies is not enough in itself to disapply the tilted balance. This was made clear by Lord Justice Lindblom in Monkhill at paragraph 38, where he said, under paragraph 11D1, it is not enough that a footnote, he was referring to what was then footnote 6, now footnote 7, that a footnote policy restrictive of development is engaged. The policy in question must actually be applied, and its application must provide a clear reason for refusal. I'm conscious, Madam, that Mr. Atkinson has also relied to the Monkhill case. The difference is that Mr. Atkinson has referred to the High Court judgment, whereas we are citing the Court of Appeals judgment. And so it is the Court of Appeals judgment that you should be taking into account and supports the proposition of law that I've just made. That's why I'm afraid Mr. Atkinson is wrong. Mr. Humphreys was therefore wrong to suggest in his report to the committee, in his proof of evidence and in cross-examination, that paragraph 11D does not apply merely because the framework's greenbelt policies are engaged. For the tilted balance to be disapplied in this case would require a finding that the harm to the greenbelt was not outweighed by the very special circumstances relied on by the appellant, and therefore the harm to the greenbelt provided a clear reason for refusal. Housing needs, supply and delivery. This is addressed above in the context section. The woeful state of housing delivery against a need for 19,720 new homes by 2034 has resulted in the council producing a draft housing delivery action plan, which the council is to make any impact on reducing its shortfall, identified progressing the then emerging local plan as the most critical step. By withdrawing the emerging local plan in March 2022, the council has, as Mrs. Mulliner said, thrown away its most critical step and has no hope now of improving delivery and reducing the 5-year housing land supply shortfall until at least quarter 4 of 2027, and indeed several years beyond then, taking into account planning applications, construction lead-in times and delivery rates, except by permitting development on greenbelt sites such as the appeal site. Issue 4, whether the harm by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations, such as to amount to the very special circumstances necessary to justify the development. The appellant accepts that there is harm to the greenbelt because the proposed development is inappropriate development in the greenbelt, and that there is some limited harm to the openness and therefore to purpose C. The issue is whether that harm is outweighed by any very special circumstances. If, as the appellant contends, there are very special circumstances, there would be no clear reason to refuse the appeal, and paragraph 11D tilted balance would apply, such that planning permission should be granted. The appellant submits that there plainly are very special circumstances, which individually and or cumulatively clearly outweigh the limited harm to the greenbelt. Mr. Humphreys agreed in cross-examination that all of the following were in principle capable of being very special circumstances, either on their own or collectively, and Mrs. Mulliner's unchallenged evidence was that all of the following matters were, in this case, very special circumstances. So 1, the council's acute need for market housing and affordable housing. So acute is the need, it is submitted that this alone would be sufficient to outweigh the limited greenbelt harm, as are the housing delivery test results for the last 3 years, the severe 5-year housing land supply shortfall, and the inability of the council to do anything about improving delivery before quarter 4, 2027 at the earliest. The provision of 36% affordable housing, 72 units, which includes an over provision of 6%, 12 units, against the top of the range required by a policy S5 in circumstances where the council has only delivered 2% of its need in the last 5 years and only has supplied 47 units in the next 5 years against an annual requirement of 391 additional affordable homes. The fact that if the council is going to have any chance of meeting its housing needs, greenbelt land will have to be developed because there are no alternatives. The fact that the council will not adopt a new local plan for at least 5 years, by which time the 1998 plan will be almost 30 years old at the very earliest. Indeed, Mrs. Mulliner made the point that even if a new local plan was adopted in quarter 4, 2027, it would be a further 3 years for the new homes allocated by that plan to be completed. In other words, delivery would actually be 8 years away from now. The economic benefits from both construction activity and the household spend when those dwellings are occupied. In the Maitland Lodge appeal, it was agreed that the ONS statistics identified a total average weekly household spend of £587.90 and calculating an estimate for 200 homes, Mrs. Mulliner said this would lead to around 6 million direct expenditure for this scheme. That the appeal site has been assessed by the council through its healer as being suitable, available and deliverable. This is not in dispute at all, and Mr. Humphreys accepts that it is. That the appeal site over-provides the amount of public open space which is of benefit to the wider community. As Mrs. Mulliner said, this contributes quite significantly to the recreational benefit of the area, allowing residents to access the public path in the wider countryside more easily without having to walk down the road to get to it. No concern was expressed by Mr. Humphreys in his report to committee about the quality of the open space, and his concerns about the topography were ill-founded. The provision of biodiversity net gain of between 16 and 19%, see paragraph 7.5 of the ecology technical note, in circumstances where there is no development plan requiring biodiversity net gain at all. The sustainability of the site, as confirmed in both the planning and transport statements of common ground, this appeal site is in a sustainable location with good access to bus services, local shops and services, as well as schools and leisure facilities. In addition to the factors above, Mrs. Mulliner identified two others. First, the opportunity to improve the settlement edge to create a strong, positive landscape interface and transition from the countryside to town was also a benefit, with the Section 106 provisions ensuring that the new settlement edge along Kennel Lane will be managed in perpetuity, thereby creating a long-term defensible boundary to the greenbelt in this location. Secondly,
Excuse me, Mr. Litton. Unfortunately, when you were on page 17.5, I froze and left the meeting and couldn't actually alert anybody to the fact that I had a problem. So I'm apologies for that. But I got.
Sorry, madam. I should have noticed that, and I'm sorry that I didn't.
No, it's
I didn't add anything, madam, to the text that you've got.
okay.
So unless you'd like me to reread from subparagraph 5, it's probably not necessary to do so.
Yeah. Where are you now?
I'm in, so I was in paragraph 61.
Yes. If you just start from there, if you can
Yes,
just start from there again, please, that'll be sufficient. Apologies for that. I'm not sure what happened, but I think it was me that froze rather than.
Yes, you seem to be on screen twice now, madam. You've got a doppelganger.
Have I?
One's frozen and the other one is active.
I do hope that it's not too bad a look I've got.
No, it's fine. All right, paragraph 61, madam. In addition to the factors above, Mrs. Mulliner identified two others. First, the opportunity to improve the settlement edge to create a strong, positive landscape interface and transition from the countryside to town was also a benefit, with the Section 106 provisions ensuring that the new settlement edge along Kennel Lane will be managed in perpetuity, thereby creating a long-term defensible boundary to the greenbelt in this location. Secondly, that the position of the provision of SUDs on site would also have an off-site benefit by controlling the rate of discharge into watercourses downstream of the appeal site. So by way of conclusion, madam, the policies most relevant to the determination of the appeal are plainly out of date and should be given little weight. Moreover, policy BE12 has been misunderstood by the council. There will be harm to the openness of the greenbelt and purpose C, but that harm is limited to the appeal site itself and temporarily to Kennel Lane. There is no other harm. Against the limited harm developing the appeal site will cause, there are multiple benefits which individually and or collectively amount to very special circumstances and clearly outweigh the harm to the greenbelt in this case. In accordance with paragraph 11D of the NPPF, the appeal should be allowed and planning permission granted because there is no clear reason to refuse permission. So, those are my closing submissions unless I can assist you otherwise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Litton. That's fine. I don't have anything to ask of you, so thank you for that. So that takes us on to just to check, am I to anticipate any cost applications? So far I haven't received any notification from either party that to be expecting anything today.
No, Madam, there's nothing from the appellant, thank you.
No, from the council, Madam. No.
Okay, thank you. Okay then, so as I said at the outset of this morning, obviously we all know that I'm awaiting the signed version of the Section 106 legal agreement relating to the planning obligations, and also the final document list that we discussed as well, which will include reference to ID 13 and 14, the closing statements that we've now got copies of.
Yes, Madam.
So, and obviously what I had said was I proposed to leave the inquiry open until such a point within the deadline that I've set that we have that I have a copy of that Section 106 agreement, and an electronic version will suffice for my purposes. So before I adjourn, I'd just like to thank everybody that's participated or has been tuned into this inquiry, for their assistance in making it as efficient a inquiry as we could expect. So without any further delay, I will now adjourn this inquiry and will be closing in writing. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you.